Chapter 4 of the Origin of the Nations and Peoples who inhabit these islands. Although these are islands, it will not be necessary to fatigue the mind by discussing, as do San Agustin and other authors in respect to other islands and to America, whence and how people and animals came to them. For if some of these islands have been, at any time since the flood, part of a continent, from that time men and animals could remain in them. While if they have always been islands, the nearness of some of them to others, and of some of them to the mainland of Asia, whence began the propagation of the human race and the settlements of the descendants of Noah, is sufficient reason why some of them could settle to these regions. And that this was really so, and that the principal settler of these archipelagos was Tharsis, son of Yavan, together with his brothers, as were Ophir and Hevelath of India, we see in the 10th chapter of Genesis, which treats of the dispersion of peoples and the settlement of countries, as we establish in another place. Now then, coming to our theme, when the conquistadors and settlers arrived at these islands and subdued that of Manila, they found three varieties or kinds of people in them. Those who held command of it, and inhabited the seashore and riverbanks and all the best parts round about, were Moro Malays of Borney, according to their own report. That is an island also, and is larger than any of these Filipinas and nearer the mainland of Malacca, where there is a district called Malayo. This place is the origin of all the Malays who are scattered throughout the most and best of all these archipelagos. From that nation of the Malays springs that of the Tagalogs, or the natives of Manila and its neighborhood. That is proved by the Tagalog language, which resembles the Malay closely, by the color and lines of the whole body, by the clothing and habit that they wore at the arrival of the Spaniards here, and lastly by the customs and ceremonies, all of which were derived from the Malays and other nations of India. The occasion of their coming to these parts might have been either that they were driven by chance through these seas, as we have seen in our days, born to these islands people from other unknown islands who spoke a language that no one understood and who had been driven by the sea, or they could have come hither purposely in the search for new lands on which to settle, because their own were too crowded, or some disaster had overtaken them which caused them to leave their home forever. But it is very likely that greed and commercial interests attracted them, as occurred in the parts of India with regard to the Moros, Persians, and Arabs. The Portuguese say in their histories that when they reached those kingdoms, they found the Moros uppermost and masters of all, by reason of the commerce which they introduced the heathen kings and rulers, the natives of the country, whose goodwill the Moros contrived to secure with rich and valuable presents. Little by little they continued to remain in the land and pay the royal duties, until they became so powerful that they revolted against the real rulers and deprived them of the best of their lands. Barros says that the first Portuguese found that had happened in those districts of India some 150 years before their arrival. In the same way, one may imagine the passage of the Malays to Borney to have occurred, and of the Borneans to Manila, and that along with the arms and temporal commerce would come some caciques, or priests of the cursed Mahometan religion, who introduced that religion into the villages and maritime nations of these parts. As for me, I can readily believe that that great island of Borney in past centuries was continued on the northeast by Paragua, and on the south by the lands near Mindanao, as is indicated by the shoals and islets of Paragua on the one side, and those called Santa Juana and other islets and shoals which extend toward Jolo and Tagima, opposite the point of La Caldera on the Mindanao shore. If this assumption be true, as is affirmed by aged Indians of those parts, the opportunity for the Borneans to scatter through the Filipinas is very evident. It is probable that the inhabitants would come to Borneo immediately from Sumatra, which is a very large land quite near the mainland of Malacca and Malayo. In the midst of that great island of Sumatra, there is a large and extensive lake, whose marge is settled by many different nations, whence, according to tradition, the people went to settle various islands. A Pampango of sense, one of these nations, finding himself adrift and astray there through various accidents, and from whom I learned it, testified that those people spoke excellent Pampango and wore the old-time dress of the Pampangos. When he questioned one of their old men, the latter answered, You are descendants of the lost people who left here in past times to settle in other lands and were never heard of again. It can be believed that the Tagalogs, Pampangos, and other civilized nations, analogous in language, color, clothing, and customs, came from parts of Borney and Sumatra, some from certain provinces or neighborhoods, and some from others. That is the reason for the difference of the languages according to the customs of these uncivilized lands, for every province or neighborhood has a different language. The nations of the Bisayas and Pintados, who inhabit the provinces of Camarines in this island of Luzon, and those of Leyte, Samar, Panay, and other neighborhoods, came, I have heard, from the districts of Makassar, where it is said that Indians live who make designs on and tattoo the body in the manner of our Pintados. Pedro Fernandez de Quiros, in the relation which he wrote of the discovery of the Solomon Islands in 1595, says that an island called Magdalena was found in 10 degrees north latitude at a distance from Peru of 1,800 leguas, which is nearly the same latitude and distance as the Filipinas, where Indians of good proportion, but taller than the Spaniards, and all naked and bearing designs on their bodies, legs, arms, and hands, and some on their faces, in the manner of our Visayas, were found. Consequently, it is apparent that there are other nations of Pintados to be discovered. We have as yet not enough data, nor even a well-founded conjecture, to say whether ours originated from the latter, or on the contrary, both from some mainland. We know well that people who tattoo the body have been seen in Brazil and Florida. Then too, the custom was formerly seen in some nations of Scythians in Asia, and of Britons in Europa, but we cannot yet determine the legitimate origin of our Visayan Pintados. If some of the natives of Mindanao, Jolo, Bohol, and part of Cebu, who are lighter complexion, braver, and of better proportions than the pure Visayans, are not Borneans, they might be Ternatans, as may be inferred from the neighborhood of the lands and the communication of one with another, and because in what concerns the worship and religion of the cursed prophet, even today they are governed by Ternate, and when they find themselves beset by the troops of Filipinas, they make an alliance and help one another. All those whom the first Spaniards found in these islands with a command and lordship over the land are reduced to the first class, the civilized peoples. Another kind, totally opposed to the above, are the Negrillos, who live in the mountains and thick forests which abound in these islands. The latter are a barbarous race, who live on the fruits and roots of the forests. They go naked, covering only the privies with some articles called bahaques, made from the bark of trees. They wear no other ornaments than armlets and anklets and bracelets, curiously wrought after their manner from small rattans of various colors, and garlands of branches and flowers on their heads and fleshy parts of the arm, and at the most, some cock or sparrowhawk feather for a plume. They have no laws or letters, or other government or community than that of kinsfolk, all those of one line of family obeying their leader. In regard to religion and divine worship, they have but little or none. The Spaniards call them Negrillos because many of them are as much black as are the Ethiopians themselves, both in their black color and in their kinky hair. There are still a number of those people in the interior in the mountains. In one of the large islands there are so many of them that it is for that reason called the island of Negros. Those people were apparently the first inhabitants of these islands, and they have been deprived of them by the civilized nations who came later by way of Samatra, the Javas, Borney, Makassar, and other islands lying toward the west. If one should ask whence could come the black people to these islands so distant from Africa and Ethiopia, where black people live, I answer that it was from near India, or Citraganjam, which was formerly settled by Ethiopic black people and was called Ethiopia. From there, it is more probable, went out the settlers of African Ethiopia, as we prove in another place. Moreover, even today does India have nations of the black race. Also, they could easily pass from the districts of the mainland of India to the nearest islands, and could come from one to the other even as far as these Filipinas. In Nueva Guinea, which is quite near Ternate, the natives are black like those of Guinea, and on that account the first explorers gave them that name, and they could also pass from those to these districts. There is another kind of people, neither so civilized as the first, nor so barbarous as the second. They generally live about the sources of the rivers, and on that account are called in some districts Ilayas. They are the Tingis, and are called Mangyanes, Zambals, or other names, for each island has a different name for them. They generally trade with the Tagalogs, Bisayas, and other civilized nations who are commonly settled near the sea and river mouths. Although those Ilayas or Tingis are not Christians, they pay some sort of recognition or tribute and have their system of policy or government. It is thought that they are a mixture of the other barbarous and civilized nations, and for that reason they are midway between the other two classes of peoples in color, clothing, and customs. We do not pretend to deny by the above that some people could have come from other parts and kingdoms of India extragangem, such as Siam, Cambodia, Cochinchina, and from China itself and even Japon, to conquer and settle in parts of these islands, especially the Chinese, from whose histories and their remains found in various parts, it is learned that in former times they were masters of these archipelagos. If they were the first settlers of the Javas, as is told by Juan de Barros, they could still more easily have settled in some parts of these islands which are near to them. Persons who know the provinces of Ilocos and Cagayan in the north of this island of Luzon assert that they have discovered there the graves of people larger than the Indians and the arms and jewels of Chinese or Japanese, who it is presumed conquered and settled in those parts, led on by the desire for gold. End of chapter.